In the remote town of Blackwood, nestled deep within the Appalachian Mountains, stands a crumbling relic of the past, Blackwood Orphanage. The locals call it the House of Echoes, a name that carries a sinister weight. Built in the late 1800s, it was once a sanctuary for children, a place of hope for those who had none. But over the decades, its purpose twisted into something far darker. Legends of unexplained disappearances, chilling whispers in the halls, and sightings of shadowy figures turned the orphanage into a ghost story shared around campfires. By the 1960s, Blackwood Orphanage was abandoned, its windows shattered and its walls covered in ivy. For decades it sat in eerie silence until a group of amateur urban explorers decided to uncover its secrets. What they found would be the stuff of nightmares, and the only record of what happened lies in a series of tapes discovered in the ruins. Tonight, we'll explore the haunting tale of Blackwood Orphanage, the horrors that unfolded within its walls, and the lingering questions that refuse to be answered. The story begins with its founder, Eleanor Blackwood, a philanthropist with a tragic past. Eleanor's own son died in a freak accident, and she poured her grief into building the orphanage. At first, it was a beacon of hope, housing dozens of children. But by the early 1900s, strange rumors began to surface. Children spoke of the man in the walls, a shadowy figure they claimed to see at night. Staff dismissed it as childish imagination. But then the disappearances began. In 1912, a boy named Samuel vanished from his bed. His belongings were untouched, and there were no signs of forced entry. Over the next decade, 6 more children disappeared, and Blackwood Orphanage gained a reputation as a cursed place. The townsfolk whispered that Eleanor had gone mad, conducting experiments on the children in a desperate attempt to contact her dead son. The truth, however, was never uncovered. In 1923, Eleanor was found dead in her office, her face frozen in terror. The orphanage limped on for another 40 years, plagued by mysterious deaths, until it was finally shut down. In 2015, 4 urban explorers, Mark, Sarah, Lucas, and Emily, decided to investigate Blackwood Orphanage. Armed with flashlights, cameras, and a thirst for adventure, they arrived at the crumbling building just as the sun dipped below the horizon. The moment they stepped inside, the air seemed to change. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint sound of creaking wood. As they explored, they found remnants of the orphanage's past, rusted bed frames, yellowed photographs, and a crumbling grand staircase. In the basement, they stumbled upon an old ledger. It contained the names of every child who had lived there, along with strange markings next to some names, symbols they couldn't decipher. Emily, the group's historian, noted that these symbols matched those found in occult texts. The group joked nervously, but unease began to creep in. Deeper in the basement, they found a locked door. After breaking it open, they discovered a hidden room. The walls were covered in strange, childlike drawings, depicting shadowy figures and grotesque faces. In the center of the room was a small wooden chair surrounded by burned candles. And there, on the chair, was an old reel-to-reel tape recorder. Mark, unable to resist, played the tape. The recording was garbled, but they could make out a woman's voice, pleading, sobbing. and the faint sound of children crying. Then came the laughter, low, guttural, and inhuman. The group decided to leave, but as they made their way back to the entrance, the building seemed to shift. Doors that were once open were now locked. Hallways stretched impossibly long, and the air grew colder with every step. Lucas, the skeptic, was the first to hear it. A soft whisper, calling his name. He brushed it off, but the whispers grew louder, more insistent. Sarah screamed, pointing down the hall. A shadow, impossibly tall and spindly, moved across the corridor and disappeared. The group quickened their pace, panic setting in. As they turned a corner, they saw the grand staircase. Relief flooded them, until they noticed the figure standing at the top. It was a child, no older than 7, staring down at them with hollow black eyes. The lights of their flashlights flickered, and the child vanished. The group bolted, but the doors wouldn't budge. Emily, desperate, suggested returning to the hidden room, hoping for another way out. Back in the basement, they found more tapes scattered across the floor. Mark played one, and the sound of Eleanor Blackwood's voice filled the room. She spoke of a gate, a ritual, and the promise of reuniting with her son. Suddenly the air grew heavy, and the room seemed to vibrate. The drawings on the walls began to shift, the shadowy figures moving as if alive. The group heard footsteps, tiny pattering steps, approaching from all directions. They turned to run, but Lucas froze. His eyes widened, and he whispered, "It's in the walls." Before anyone could react, he was dragged into the darkness, his screams echoing through the halls. With Lucas gone, the remaining 3 were consumed by terror. They sprinted through the maze-like corridors, the whispers and footsteps growing louder. Sarah stumbled, and Mark stopped to help her. But Emily kept running, driven by pure survival instinct. She found herself in the orphanage's chapel, where a massive mural depicted Eleanor surrounded by shadowy figures. The whispers turned into screams, and Emily realized she wasn't alone. Mark and Sarah burst into the room, slamming the door behind them. The shadows outside pounded against the walls, and the 3 huddled together, praying for morning. Just as dawn broke, the pounding stopped. The whispers faded, and the shadows retreated. The group stumbled out of the orphanage, leaving Lucas behind. Months later, the tapes were discovered by another explorer and uploaded online. Paranormal investigators and true crime enthusiasts descended on Blackwood, but the orphanage refused to give up its secrets. Mark, Sarah, and Emily never spoke of that night again, but they were haunted by recurring nightmares. Lucas was never found, and his disappearance remains a mystery. The orphanage still stands, silent and foreboding, a monument to the darkness that lingers in forgotten places. Those who dare to enter rarely leave unscathed. And the question remains, what really happened to the children of Blackwood Orphanage, and why do their shadows still roam the halls?